About a week ago, Linus and the gang converted an old Dell Optiplex office PC into what they said is a pretty good value for money 1080p medium to low settings gaming machine.
Whoa! Dang!
Buttery smooth.
That is way smoother. Look at that.
Now my first thought was, I can definitely do this better. I can find better deals in Japan and build a faster PC for less money. But during the process of building my anti-Linus machine, I realized A, it's not very easy to do, and B, the question kept creeping up, is it actually worth it? Should you spend roughly $150 on a gaming machine? And we'll find out all of these answers after this message from our sponsors. Now before we actually look at whether or not you should spend $150 on a gaming machine, or if that's the kind of thing you should just leave up to like tech YouTubers and crazy people, let's have a look at the actual PC that I had and how it compares to Linus Tech Tips' offering. Now, as far as the CPU goes, I actually downgraded a bit. I'm using a Q8400. It's still a quad-core CPU, which Linus showed was very important, but its core clocks are a little bit lower. It's 2.66 GHz as opposed to 2.8. Hopefully that doesn't make too big a difference. I've also got 4 gigs of DDR2, and I also put an SSD in it because, well, that's very important for usability. And then I decided to splurge on a graphics card. I actually found a great deal on a GTX 960. But whether or not the CPU is going to be too much of a bottleneck is something that we will see later, I guess. And the thing is, the motherboard that I used is actually, it doesn't allow for overclocking, so it means that I can't squeeze more performance out of the CPU, unfortunately. Now, the total amount of money that I spent on this entire setup was $140, which is $10 less than what Linus spent on his setup. Now that we've got the parts configuration out of the way, let's see how this PC actually performs compared to Linus Tech Tips' offering. And after having looked at the benchmarks, it seems as though the Linus Destroyer 9000 didn't really do its job. It didn't destroy Linus. Except for in one game, Fortnite, so that's a bit weird, but I guess it shows that Fortnite isn't as CPU intensive as Counter-Strike Go is and as Overwatch is. But yeah, that's one of the issues with these benchmarks, because they were also quite vague with what settings they used. They just said like 1080p low. It meant that I might not have been able to match up the settings, so that might be why there were discrepancies. Now, with all of the direct comparisons out of the way, let's get into the real meat and potatoes of this video, which is, should you actually spend $150 on a gaming PC? The average frame rates look pretty good, but is it actually worth the money? Now, there are two reasons why I think it actually isn't. General parts compatibility. Because of how old these platforms are, it's quite difficult to find conclusive information around what components will work with what other components. And Linus actually had this issue in his video, because they wanted to use an Extreme Edition quad-core from the same generation as the CPU that the Dell Optiplex had in it. And even though Intel said it should technically be compatible, it didn't work. But luckily, because they were using a Dell machine, they could just go onto Dell's website and kind of look at their compatibility list even for their older machines. I wasn't as lucky though, because I had a Jetway motherboard in my PC that is not a pre-built. It meant that it was from a company that no one's ever heard of before, and there was no information around what components should work with it. And luckily, the CPU I got did end up working with the motherboard, no problem, but I ran into a big issue when trying to install Windows on the machine, because obviously I wanted to use a flash drive to install Windows on it, because I mean, who owns a CD drive today? And according to the internet and sources around motherboards with legacy BIOSes on it, which is from the Stone Age, but it's what this motherboard has, you should be able to do that. And well, unfortunately, I just couldn't. I tried various file systems on the USB drives and various ways of actually making it a boot drive, but the motherboard wouldn't recognize any of it. So then after about 2 days of struggling with this, I just gave up and decided to buy a CD drive. After that, it was really easy to install Windows on it because it immediately recognized everything. But for me, it was a struggle, and I have quite a lot of experience building older PCs and just PCs in general. But because of the budget of this build, it's kind of not aimed at people who have a lot of experience. It's aimed at people who want to try out PC gaming, but aren't really ready to commit, so they don't want to spend that much money. And if you're in that position, trying to wade through the ridiculous amount of information to try and find something relevant to the components that you're using is a nightmare. And it could lead to you not wanting to continue on with the PC gaming experience just because of how difficult troubleshooting components are when they're this old. Now, a response to this could be that, well, just buy the exact setup that Linus Tech Tips shows in his videos, because he, an experienced PC builder, goes through the effort of seeing what is compatible and then showing you the results. But the thing is, that kind of brings me to my second issue. Even though my gaming PC seemed fairly impressive, I mean, you're getting about 60 frames per second average in all of these games. At 1080p, it seems playable, right? But it didn't really feel like 60 frames per second, because you'd have like a 2-minute period of gaming where it runs perfectly fine, and then just randomly, not related to what's happening on screen, because it wouldn't be, you know, necessarily a particularly busy combat sequence or whatever, the frame rate would drop to like 10 frames per second for a good minute or so, which is terrible. And if that happens mid gunfight, then you're going to die. And the thing is, it's just not a good gaming experience having these ridiculous frame drops kind of happen sporadically throughout the match that you're playing. Now, I don't know if that's something that's unique to the specific PC that I was using. So the thing is, when looking at Linus's results of like, whoa, this is really playable and everything's hunky-dory, I'd like to know for what kind of periods of time they actually ran the benchmarks for. Because if you run a benchmark for like 3 minutes, you could show that it does perform really well, but it just wasn't my experience when gaming for long periods of time. So when I played like an entire 40-minute Dota match, for example, there would be periods during which you would have massive frame drops. And it was the same for Overwatch. Overwatch was the worst, by the way, out of all of them. And the same thing for CSGO and Fortnite. So yeah, I don't think the results are as impressive as they seem on the surface. In conclusion, if you're new to PC gaming and you're looking to buy a daily driver PC, don't spend $150 on one, because it's not going to be the best experience. I think if you do want to save money, buy a new CPU, something like an entry-level Intel or AMD CPU, a new motherboard, some RAM, and then you can buy a second-hand graphics card, something like the GTX 960, because I got it for about $80, which is quite cheap, especially considering that it performs similarly to a GTX 1050 Ti. So in that situation, you could save about $100. Or if you want to buy something for even less money, go for a Dell Optiplex, but not with a CPU that old. Buy something with at least an i7 2600K or maybe even an i5 2500K in it, because those CPUs will cost a little bit more, but they will perform a lot better in games. And if you put a better graphics card in, it's not going to be bottlenecked as much by the CPU. But if you're a PC enthusiast that enjoys playing with old hardware, then go for it. In fact, you've probably already bought one and you're busy screwing around with it now while watching this video of me. So if you're doing it to have fun, go for it, but don't use it as a daily driver. Anyway, with that, I think that's the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked it, do like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. Until the next one, bye-bye.